How's the current situation in Washington, D.C.? Are the protests still peaceful on your end?
There have been protests continuing every night. They've continued to build, although last night we did not have a curfew for the first time in many days. But we also had a pretty significant thunderstorm, so that literally dampened the crowd. However, what we're hearing is that on Saturday, there is expected to be the biggest rally yet. Some people are talking about hundreds of thousands of people that will show up for that event.
So what is the sentiment over there now that the police officers have all been charged?
You mean in Minnesota? Yes. That definitely was something that was expected and a bit of a relief. But this is just the beginning for this movement, it appears, in the United States. Just because the officers have been arrested doesn't mean that everybody is going to leave the streets and then conclude that racial problems in the United States have ended. This looks like the beginning of a very significant movement. Also, possibly we're at an inflection point in United States history with the president continuing to focus on law and order rather than the issues of racial divide. And that really puts him in contrast.
Can you help explain to our Thai audience why this time around the reaction from the public is so intense or so widespread?
I think a big difference is this time around you had an incident that lasted for 8 minutes that was videotaped. Everyone could clearly see what was going on. They could clearly hear what was going on. And there was really no way to spin that in any way that would have been sympathetic to the view of law enforcement officers. And then it can be argued that the response from the President of the United States, instead of being consoler-in-chief, came out with a lot of comments about law and order, that only exacerbated the incident and caused more fury among the protesters who, of course, have not perceived the president generally being too sympathetic to minorities in this country, although the president will tell you he's done more for African Americans than any other president.
I think you must be doing a very dangerous job, out on the streets. Your colleagues also because a number of journalists have been assaulted by both sides of the demonstrations. So why do you think journalists have been targeted more than in the past?
Well, I think, as you noted, the president certainly has portrayed the media as the enemy, and also trust among Americans in general in the media is quite low. In the past decades, I can tell you from being on the streets during demonstrations, the police would generally not target the media, and demonstrators would not target the media, but that is definitely happening these days. The media being seen as a kind of a symbol for, I guess, everyone to vent their frustrations act. And of course, perhaps the media does need to do some sort of introspection to figure out why this is happening. But the one thing that is different that I can tell you in decades past is that the domestic media in the United States itself is very polarized, where you have networks especially that tend to lean to the left or lean to the right. And that could be one explanation as well. But there's absolutely no excuse for the types of attacks that we've seen by demonstrators and police on still photographers, videographers, and reporters. And I think we've been quite fortunate so far that no one has been even more serious.
So Steve, many Thai people have been caught by surprise by the level of violence caused by the demonstrations. How would you explain to this Thai watching what is going on in the U.S. as to why you have come to this point?
Well, I think one thing that's very important to emphasize is that at least 99% of the people out on the streets who are of all colors and races and ethnic backgrounds and ages are peaceful and are sincere in their intentions to peacefully demonstrate. there are a small number of troublemakers. Some are opportunists who are just looking to use this as an opportunity to vandalize and to loot. And then there are others who have extreme political causes, from what we can tell, both on the extreme left and the extreme right, who are also taking advantage of all that. And of course, when you have these acts of violence, there's a lot of attention by the authorities and by the media on these particular acts.
So, Steve, how do you see things will develop in the next few days?
I think a lot depends on whether there are these sort of violent opportunists that continue to mix in and how severely law enforcement responds. Of course, if we see a continuation of police brutality, there was a case in Buffalo, New York on Thursday night where a 75-year-old man was shoved with apparently no provocation by some police officers, knocked to the ground, was bleeding from his head and is in serious condition in the hospital. Those types of scenes enrage people. So we need to see a restraint by law enforcement and also demonstrators and organizers to keep their rallies peaceful. We have seen some of that in Washington, where in recent days when people tried to start to do some acts of vandalism, that others in the crowd that told them that that was wrong and to stop it. It is a very interesting time right now. I think it's very hard to predict.
Steve, from what we have been reading from the U.S. media, we believe that the demonstrations have been spontaneous and the demonstrations are leaderless. Is that the case?
I think in the vast majority of cases that this is not being orchestrated by any particular movement. You have a number of different grassroots groups who have come together, and sometimes you will see people with bullhorns trying to exhort the crowd, and then the emphasis by the U.S. Attorney General and others has been to accuse Antifa, an extreme left-wing anti-fascist group, of causing the violence. And while there may be some individuals who adhere to that cause, we cannot say that this is being led by extreme left elements by any stretch of the imagination. So yes, it does appear to a great degree to be a sort of a spontaneous grassroots uprising in the country, and that has been the case in other types of demonstrations in recent years in this country as well.